Welcome to Carl DeGregorio's Desk Session 78. What do we got for 78? 78, we're moving into the 70s, late 70s, and 78, I don't know. I don't have a lot for that one either. The movies were starting to morph into blockbusters, I think, we could talk about. I know we talked last week about Star Wars in 77. 78 saw what? What big hits of 78? Superman, maybe? I'm not exactly sure. But we are progressing nicely into knocking these things out, being sure and not sure at the same time. We're moving into different phases, etc., etc. I'm saying we, this is me. Spoke last week about attending movies. Fridays were my dad's day off. One of them, I think he was off Thursday and Friday for much of my childhood. So Friday was a movie day, which is a very idyllic and fortunate memory that many out there, I'm sure, would envy, and I don't give that short shrift. And the origin story that presents for many actors, I would assume, was as my mom would describe it, since it was sort of like a dad-son thing. I would come home and I would. She would, I don't remember very well, but I would come back with very high recall and dialogue and perform for my mom, maybe to catch her up because she didn't, attend, or I like the attention it brought, or any of these number of things. And I wouldn't be unique sitting on a couch on a podcast or sitting on a couch in a therapist's office to see where the kernel of wanting to be an actor may have come about years before. And this is a story. Occasionally, living in New Jersey, just across the river, my dad would have to commute into the city, and occasionally he'd have an appointment before work, because I think he would go in from the 3 to 11 slot for the nighttime sports page. And so occasionally he'd have a doctor's appointment or something to do early in the day that would get him in the city on the wrong side of the river, and he would just catch a movie. If you listen to Bill Simmons' podcast called The Rewatchables, his dad would call certain movies 5 o'clockers. So this wouldn't be that. This would be like the first matinee, which is maybe a particularly New York thing. But his dad would talk about a 5 o'clocker as like that Showtime was a movie where you had to kill time before a holdover from a 9 to 5, where you'd have a nighttime meeting, like some kind of faculty meeting or something, and you had to kill time between the meeting and after quitting time, and so you'd go see a 5 o'clocker. And a 5 o'clocker is a movie you wouldn't jump to see at 7 as a date night. It wasn't the big movie. It would be a Charles Bronson movie, or it would be something along those lines. And the origin story, my dad, was that I guess the year, it must have been before 78, but the year Rocky came out, he had a situation where he had to go see the first movie, or he did his morning appointment and then had to kill time, and it didn't make sense to come back to Jersey, and so he went to see Rocky, maybe even the first day or before the reviews, I guess is what it would be. And like many people, he was kind of bowled over by it, and he called that a couple times on movies. He loved My Big Fat Greek Wedding. He loved, which is one I still haven't seen. He loved Rocky, and he kind of espoused that he kind of had a feeling about it. And I think The Full Monty, which is one of my favorites, was one that he really liked. And another odd film, Croupier, I forget how it means like card dealer, or like a casino dealer, and that I think was the big breakout for Clive Owen, which was a good call because the guy did ascend and then he sort of plateaued at some point. but cool actor, cool movie. And so he had a notion of having taste in these matters. And in his earlier career, when he worked in New Haven, I guess you sort of understand that sometimes he would go see the out of town plays. We Bombed in New Haven was a play called We Bombed in New Haven, and the way things used to go on Broadway is they'd call out of town tryouts, and so they would go out of town, and a lot of times they'd go to New Haven because that's almost a commutable distance to the city. It was a fairly sophisticated audience, and so they would basically go to New Haven to see if they could iron out the kinks, to get like a preview, to get a little litmus test of whether the show had legs. And so the play was called We Bombed in New Haven. My dad worked there, and I think occasionally he got he had the byline, or he had the assignment to review the play or to interview. And there's some photos I would love to have copies of him talking to Gwen Verdon, the great Broadway star of Damn Yankees and many other films, the wife of Bob Fosse. And so you know that FX did Fosse Verdon was a mini series they did with Sam Rockwell and Michelle Williams, and I was avid to watch that because of that connection. And one of the plays that got me started in high school was doing Damn Yankees. And one of the great things about Damn Yankees as a musical, for certainly the high school set, you'll see it for the rest of time, because you can appeal to the chorus of guys who might be reticent to perform in a musical. You can appeal to the jocks to play a baseball team and to sing You Gotta Have Heart and all that. And the great song in that is Whatever Lola Wants, Lola Gets. And I played Arvide, I think. I played the devil, the one who tempts the lead, Joe, Shoeless Joe from Hannibal Moe. The devil tempts the player to sell his soul to be a great baseball player, and Lola is the sort of tempting agent. Anyway, that whole thing about Bombed in New Haven, what you find out about that through the story is, or through this anecdote, or this way I'm starting this desk session, is that the exalted status of the critic previous to Rotten Tomatoes, or previous to the sort of blogosphere, and previous to the backlash and the dissembling and the eroding and the self-inflicted nonsense that has what we hear way too often, that the sort of shame and the folly and the uselessness of legacy media. I don't like buzzy words, but you hear some of this from my dad. Was a newspaper man, so he had more than just sports, but that was what he settled into. But previous to that, what would happen is, in many cases, the person to review the plays on a newspaper would be someone who just, hey, somebody who's got time tonight, who didn't have a family, is like, grab tickets and go see this thing so we get an article about that play opening. And it wasn't necessarily an exalted position. It was whoever the hell was like around to do it. And then so you would see, it wasn't, but what happened is, there is a, I hate to use symbiotic relationship, but there is a relationship between, the artist has to be bulletproof to criticism to some degree. And yet, if it's a hit and the Times would say it, that goes on the marquee. And that is where hand, glove, chicken, egg, reviews and press and publicity and all these things, like I don't know if it's easier now, but because what happened is that was courting critical response. And so as a marketing tool, they started to publish good reviews. And you'll even notice before the internet, and when you would read the papers every day in New York, and you would be a little more in tune with the theater scene, some of these plays that weren't hits, that weren't well reviewed, some of them would concoct words fragments to put enthusiastic, or they had to find they may have said that I had a spectacular cough that was disruptive to the performance, and they would put spectacular from the New York Daily News or something on their marquee. So there's all kinds of gamesmanship. And I've done enough theater, and the beauty of going to school in a city. It would have been better to be New York, but in Pittsburgh, and getting to do shows, a lot of the shows were reviewed in the paper. So we got some real world a notion of what a review was for. And so early on in the developing career, if it was well reviewed, oftentimes they would tack that thing up on the newspaper in the dressing room, and everybody would scour it for personal praise or just, it feels good. But you have to make a decision, and I had made the decision not to read those until the end of the show, because what also can happen is it can just decimate your confidence. It can make you rethink your performance and put you in your head. And the best bet is to know how hard you work, to know that the show is the show, and to go out there and let the audience speak. And that's what we have now, more of an opportunity with the internet, and Rotten Tomatoes, etc. But and this may be getting a bit academic, but we had one of the main writers from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette as the big paper in Pittsburgh, and he came to speak to us as a class. I had just debuted, some good memories. I just debuted in my first equity show while in college, my senior year, and so the review of the show was interest to people in the department, my classmates, and it not being a CMU show, it was my first professional review, etc. And he came in to talk about it, and they went well on at least one of the papers. At the time, there were two papers, and I think I was described as a constant pleasure and understated. Not that I think I probably had. If I were inclined to have a tattoo, I might have thrown like some old English letters across my upper back, like a constant pleasure. But he was asserting and explaining to us that a well sort of rounded circulation, the paper, and now I guess whatever you would call it online, or your media diet, a well sort of educated populace, or that reviews aren't for the ego of the actor or for the director. They're not. He said from his point of view that the review is for someone who won't see the show. So it's not to be panned or praised per se. It's to be sort of previewed, so that you know what's going on in your city. And I suppose if it was of particular interest, then yes, he would praise it. But it wasn't. That's the problem, they say now with Rotten Tomatoes, is you're going data-driven, not taste-driven. And a lot of people who hate tastemakers, who hate gatekeepers, who hate academia, who hate old guard and power structures and things like that, they'd rather go with the data-based review system. So if you have a 90, and we all do it now, anything under 60, you're gonna think is a bomb, right? Or you just, and that's where the sort of tumbling moss, the rock growing moss, or the tumbling dice, or it's either going to elevate or decline the art. And in many cases it declines because you're going for the 90s, and the 90s are going to have mass appeal, or the audience becomes important in terms of and what happened in the 80s into the 90s was and I think it but one of the most early examples of what they call market research, where they screened films. Sometimes they'd screen a film with rough edits and you could see the celluloid clips. They would have old film scores, so substitute film scoring. Like, they'd show these raw cuts. They're almost finished, but there'd be color corrected scenes and some weren't, and they do market research. I actually tried to be the guy who got butts in the seats when I first moved to LA to do that job. But in the earliest example of market research affecting the creative process, which essentially is what Going to New Haven would have done, but it would have been more based on trying the show out, changing numbers, being in previews, taking some of that feedback. But the artist, Spielberg's Sondheim and those guys would be sitting in the back rows or wherever they would sit, and they'd watch the show with the audience, and they would figure out what numbers to cut, what numbers needed to pick up, and it wasn't a locked show, so it would get tweaked. And in movies, it's a lot more expensive to do that, and reshoots, and there's famous stories of people needing wigs because they moved on to another project and then had to come back for a reshoot, because these audiences, oftentimes, who are not, they are the bread and butter. So I understand you have to pay to play, and I understand that there's no romance without finance, and I understand that. But what happens is if you lower your artistic notions and go into more of a market research, you'll get endings that may satisfy but are less artistically appropriate, let's say. For example, I keep dancing around this, and I notice I do this, and I'm doing it with another digression, but it's funny how these things work. And I guess that's why some people outsource even to AI and to editing programs and to assistants and or producers, how you would outsource the finding clips, right? Because you're in a flow or in a conversation with sometimes a guest. In this case, I just talk at the camera, but the digression is because I have to hold on to a simultaneous thought while I speak, and I don't know why I'm belaboring the point. And a lot of this was part of the trouble with some of my stand-up. If I didn't record it and listen and find out, there'd be all these fallow periods where I'd just be like, set up punchline, dude, set up punchline. These digressions are cute if you're being in conversation, but on stage you want to, and then to stay on topic, what do they say in musical theater? Don't bore us, get to the chorus, right? So the chorus that I have been avoiding is that the earliest example of market research and reshooting being really put to the test, and where a lot of people say the death knell of the preeminence of art in film and the preeminence of Final Cut, and not doing everything by committee and not doing everything by algorithmic, because essentially the human population and these audiences that were tested, and they may have been done analog, but it's algorithmically letting the masses decide the endings of things. And so to get to the chorus and the punchline, the film, that is the biggest example that I can remember from reading Premiere Magazine, or what it might have been at the time, was Fatal Attraction. Great performance, Brando-esque from Glenn Close. She was so riveting in that film, and put herself on the map as a bona fide, movie star. So good, that movie and that performance, and the way they ratcheted up the tension, that it was it spawned a genre, right? The roommate from hell, the side piece from hell, the tutor from hell, the nanny from hell. All of these movies follow that template ever more. The problem was that she's a disturbed woman, and there is a very good miniseries version of this with I think it's Lizzie Kaplan playing Alex, and Joshua blanking on his last name, the guy from Dawson's Creek, the sort of second lead, R.I.P. Vanderbeek, but the other guy, Joshua Jackson, in the roles from the film, and they expand it out, and it's, I think, 8 episodes or something like that. But in that character that Glenn Close played, Alex, she is maybe a borderline personality, maybe a full psychotic, maybe clinically depressed. There's a million things wrong with her, and yet she, from her point of view as the actor, and this is where acting does affect the story, is from her point of view as an actor, she's been manipulated, used, and tossed aside, and she may have misinterpreted, but he is a culprit, and that's why the conflict in that in that movie is so ratcheted up high, and she does eventually fall to pieces and does insane things. And wasn't it enough that she did the thing with the rabbit, right? Wasn't it enough? And now you've seen that scene is archetypical. They did it in The Sopranos when Gloria Trillo drove Carmela home from the Mercedes dealership. You know, that's a nod to Alex in Fatal Attraction going to meet the wife of her lover, you know? And so it's what they do in the miniseries is they flesh out what's really happening on her side of things, which is, you know, why the long form of storytelling is interesting. So you start to see where her psychotic or her the raw material of that personality disorder is seated, and how it's very riveting because with that you see that this is she's had these meltdowns with relationships before. There are other dudes in the cycle of her love addiction / borderline / toxic narcissist or whatever might be wrong with her. And in a way, in that longer form, you feel sympathy where you don't in the film so much. But because Glenn Close is so riveting and so powerful and so able to turn on a dime, Jekyll and hiding, from sexy in the elevator, in the capturing of the man in that moment, and then flipping, and then, you know, the thing that I joke with my girl is she'll say, "I'll not be ignored," and you're just like, I mean, and the thing that's hilarious about the universality of that story is I was neither a corporate lawyer with kids and a house in Connecticut or upstate, Westchester, wherever I forget where he was. I was neither that guy. I was in my teens when I saw the movie, but the idea of Dominic Dunn wrote a book called The Inconvenient Woman. Like when the inconvenient woman says, "I'll not be ignored," you're just like, I don't know where. I guess these are hardwired. Male, female, archetypical, notions of. And I think it's good storytelling because the protagonist antagonist thing is you do identify with your hero, who is a flawed hero because he's cheating on his wife, but it's like, come on, man, you don't deserve all that. And then it's essentially a thriller, right? An erotic thriller, which is a genre that went away, but it's also a morality tale. And so what you have in the market research, getting back to the course, the market research and the first early screenings of Fatal Attraction had her killing herself, which is depressing. And if people do suffer, and I guess I should have said unalived herself for trigger warning, but and not to make light, because that was so riveting a performance that there are people of that, and I guess the title tells you everything is fatal, so it's not injured attraction, it's fatal attraction. So it's all there in the title and in the telling. But she took her own life in the original screening, which is thematically in the progression of her illness or the progression of her psychosis, and that final act, it may have been that she did it in his house. She was still going to find a way to make that an inconvenient and troubling way to get revenge on the male. But I'd have to read more about the actual cut and where that scene happened, if she did it alone, if she did it at his house. But the point was, the only thing that was going to satisfy kind of the rabid audience, which would be, like I said, letting the algorithm decide, which is going to be pushing violence forward, pushing harsh words, pushing salacious. If you take those surveys you hand out at these marketing screenings, they're going to say the bitch needs to die, basically, right? And so that was such a strong reaction to not wanting the unresolved, she offs herself. They changed the ending to Michael Douglas, defending his home from the psycho and putting her down with some great jump scares and turns around. And so then by the end, even the wife, even the audience is back on the hero side of that. We had to put her down. That was out of control. And with her taking her own life, that is at least putting some kind of just the whole sordid, rotten thing on top of this whole thing. And I don't know if that's referencing Fatal Attraction is probably, that's a movie that's not aged well for a lot of different reasons, culturally speaking. And so, I don't tread in those waters, but it reminds me of a show I wrote where there's an infidelity in a young late 20s kind of story I was telling, and there's an infidelity there, and one of the lines in my show is, the other woman says, you got to learn that you shouldn't fuck with people's lives or you shouldn't fuck with people just because you think you're cute. And and the overarching theme of the show, and I think any story of that kind of interpersonal imbalance, is that go easy on me, is like, that's why that Adele song kind of loops in here, is where we're all delicate, whether we want to admit it or not. We're fragile. So what he did to his, the being able to do that to your wife, being able to do that to the woman, all this stuff, it's outside of judgment. It's tough on people's spirits. And so, go easy on people, and that's why that's good art. And I guess, I don't know how Damn Yankees and Fatal Attraction, wind up on the same page, but, and just how it basically goes down to, do you let the critic in when you're writing? And that's a problem I've had. That's part of my procrastination is part of my procrastination is because in these sort of thorny times, I want to make sure that I steer clear of the third rail things. And that is a bad self-edit that doesn't need to happen, at least in the first draft, and it doesn't need to happen before an audience either. And so if I'm doing that preemptively, that is essentially me doing these market researches and putting up surveys, and that's not good for the art itself. And maybe that's not good for where we are with the Rotten Tomatoes. But economics does play into that, because you can't afford flops. And the funny thing is, there's still flops. So I don't understand why the risk aversion in the structure of making movies. I don't know why the outside of the box things that shouldn't have been hits that were hits, i.e., and look at these underdog stories that Rocky, the Full Monty, all these stories that appealed to my dad, appealed to me. My Big Fat Greek Wedding, which is something, again, I've never seen, but like that started as a one woman play in Santa Monica and spawned a franchise. And so all these, and then what happened is also the advent of entertainment journalism. So Premiere Magazine was very lofty, but I remember, because I showed a promise in acting, I think one of my Christmas gifts was Premiere Magazine. I got Entertainment Weekly. I got Rolling Stone. And so before the internet, I was packed full of all this sort of blogosphere, was, reading these articles and knowing about Fatal Attraction being market researched and altered. And I appreciate a lot of the, I wasn't the biggest Game of Thrones fan, but I did sort of suffer through it. And I think I made the mistake of skipping a season but not going back over it, so I was lost for a lot of it. And I watched to the end because sometimes there's the urge to be so counterculture that you don't pay attention. And then for me, it's a little bit of a wanting to join a club, wanting to be up to date, wanting to have, man, it feels less lonely to be on top of things cultural events wise, right? So I stuck with it, and people were, incessantly bagging on the, and the thing is, these reviews that used to be one person, a Pauline Kael or Clive Barnes, these people who held power to make or break a show, Now it's, all of us have a platform, which is for good or worse, and so it's often negative when things are, and then there's the sense of being arch, to take a contrarian stand over a universally lauded art, just to be a dick, But the internet and the articles, and then the problem is what goes first, chicken or egg, algorithm or compiled data in an analog way. And then to put it to use in the process is sort of like the old-fashioned way of using an algorithm. And do you respond? And the Game of Thrones was notorious for having an unsatisfactory finale. And I don't know how you wrap up a show of that magnitude and scale. And I don't remember. I know, spoiler alert. Bran, I think, is the character, is the guy who could like astral project. And he was thrown out of a window by his uncle, I think, and crippled. And so he had to be wheeled around and shit. But he became the they put him on the Iron Throne, right? And everybody's pissed, And I don't know enough about the story, and I don't know enough about, because I dated in high school, I didn't really pay attention to the ins and outs of the Game of Thrones storytelling. But I was baffled, just like everybody, I suppose. And I don't know what was the alternative, because they, it's just like pick someone to sit on the throne, and I guess they wanted Khaleesi, right? Because then cultural affairs mix into it, and so there was such a backlash to what it fucked up, but my thing was, and this may get a little pious, but to have a Twitter page or a blog or even a fairly well circulated column to say that the ending sucked versus it was just not the satisfying ending I wanted, sucked. That's invalid in terms of criticism, and maybe what they managed to do for the entirety of the seasons and the scope and the project and the eyeballs they got on, maybe that's not a qualification you can step to and say it sucked. And that would be the fact that maybe whoever was running that show maybe didn't capitulate to the mob mentality of the internet. Maybe it was less satisfying, but essentially they did what the producers and writers and studio didn't do with Fatal Attraction, is they didn't give the crowd pleasing ending. And I don't think they suffered much from it, but you have to stick to your guns as an artist. But when you're a people pleaser and you want to be liked, that can be part of your problem, and that's what people forget. If they had market researched Rocky, they would have had him win at the end of the first installment, right? Rocky doesn't win in the first Rocky. And Rocky 2 is a little bit of a sequel thing, but a long form. And if he had even the access to listen, I don't think they were doing market research in 76. So they would also, this is right around the time in 78, 70, 77, 70, 76, 77, 75, I guess. But Jaws really wrecked things because previous to 75 and Jaws, they didn't release things simultaneously on 3,000 screens. They would start in New York and start in LA, which is, coastal elitism. And part of that is what the internet has destroyed, and maybe for better or for whatever, depending if where you live. I've always been on the coasts my whole life. So, but, to make it more democratic or populist, they just released these big blockbusters on 3,000 screens. So they had to be a certain you're not going to release My Dinner with Andre on 3,000 screens because nobody wants to see that shit. So the type of movie that's made, and like with many things in our world, and I used to work in restaurants with a lot of younger people, and I would say these things are, you got to look 30 years more. Sometimes 30 years is how things change or how things seed, right? Political correctness. I was hearing about that in college 30 years ago. It just maybe took on a ball of yarn or a ball, something, a snowball rolling downhill. It became what it is today. But none of this stuff happens overnight. The blockbuster film, writing by committee, using market research, and then what that ushered in all the way back to 75 or maybe 80 something, 87 with Fatal Attraction, if I'm not mistaken. But like all of that writing for the populace response, it then gets to the point where, is anybody going to really care about an AI film that has been crowdsourced over so much time that it's all we want is just the good shoot 'em up, like Bill Simmons' dad says, a 5 o'clocker, a movie that you wouldn't, it's sometimes it's in that category of an airplane movie. So you don't watch, again, you probably don't watch My Dinner with Andre on an airplane. You're confined. I even, as maybe, I'm not considering myself a snob I look for something with The Rock or Jason. There's a certain type of movie you want on a plane. Maybe one you wouldn't watch at home or go to the theater to see because what am I going to do? I'm stuck on this plane. I'm probably going to watch two. So, you do like Sweet and Sour. You watch one upbeat one and one low beat one. And essentially what streaming has done is it's given us the back of a headrest in our houses. Right? So the kind of things people are watching on a streamer with the ability to turn it off and to not suffer through has changed tastes that we'd rather, we can always bail. And you can always bail on a plane, not out of the plane, but you can bail on the movie you're watching in the back of the headrest. And it's changed where the consumer is the boss. And maybe it always was, right? That was always the very, I guess the Mickey Spillane, the famous writer, a lot of these mystery writers are denigrated by the intelligentsia, right? You know how many more people have read The Firm by John Grisham than have read Infinite Jest? Like, it's a factor of 1,000,000 or whatever. I mean, not a factor, but it's exponential, and you're never going to see the New York Times put the Firm or Scott Turow or Mickey Spillane. And Mickey Spillane said the best feedback, and I may be misquoting the author and the quote, but I think it's Mickey Spillane. But he said the best feedback you can get is sales. So a long time ago, a lot of these quote-unquote pulp writers, they mollified themselves or assuaged their aspirations by having massive audiences. And I'm a huge Michael Connelly fan, and and those turn into this is how the disconnect in culture used to be, and it's been eliminated to some degree, and then the highbrow is now clawing at relevance. But it used to be that what's happened today is something Michael Connelly television and films are, at least in streaming, like Michael Connelly stuff is considered is prestige TV, right? Or what are they, premium television, coming from a book that wouldn't have made the grade with the ABT, American Ballet Theater, or that crowd. The people who read the Sunday Times would not put Michael Connelly, but then we all know his books are dope. I read his dope, and that was when I learned, with a lot of my young brain in my early years in school, was I struggled to read the classics because they bored me, or I had ADD, or I had, I was too tired from extracurriculars, or I just couldn't focus. And I thought I was a bad reader per se. And it turned out that if you just read whatever the fuck you want. As long as you're powering through books, you can increase you can read. Some of the things on these shelves are lowbrow and some of them are too esoteric for most. And because I went with my interests and then found out I'll read around the clock. I've buried a book in a day. And not many of them, because not many, and they're definitely not Infinite Jest or these things that win the prizes that, and so the internet has kind of made everything that, they took away, and I don't know why. I'd have to ask someone at Netflix, but they used to be, you'd only watch things that were 97%. They would have percentiles of people thumbs upping these things. And again, we did all their market research. So we're paying for the feature, and then we're giving them all the research. And then it's this sort of vicious cycle once it's put in the hopper to either give us what we want or give us more of what will keep eyeballs and second screening and all these things. And all I'm saying is a lot of this, when you put profit margins, and the thing about the fine arts is that a lot of them are subscription based, and they're for the wealthy. So, and there's fundraising. So, opera, ballet, symphony. They get the butts in the seats they're gonna get, and they try to hold on to subscribers and donations and fundraising, and it's as the culture shifts away from that, there's just a different business model, I guess is what I'm saying. And so I guess there's the beauty of American art and any art, and as we get global, is that there's something for everybody. And I just hope, my only hope is that we all deem it's not essential, but it's important. And where do we go from person to person if we can't just talk about something that we have a passion for? Obviously it will be your family, and it'll be your kids, and it'll be your wife and your kids and your partner, whatever. That should be where your passion lies. I agree. But until you get to those moments, what's filling you up until you, and then what do you pass on in terms of your legacy of appreciating art? And I don't know if I agree with this, but Fran Lebowitz, said that the part about the audience having taste and knowing, like, you have to be a very educated audience to know, well, that version of Swan Lake wasn't as good as the one in Gelsey Kirkland's Swan Lake was much better. You'd have to know that, you'd have to have seen it a few times. You'd have to know what the hell's going on, because in ballet they tell the story only through movement and music. So whatever's emoting through the tippy toes and all that stuff that they do in ballet, and you'd have to know that one ballerina, had more power, and one had more delicacy, or one had the whole package. One's lifts weren't high, like Baryshnikov was a great leaper, or whatever the hell it might have been. You'd have to know, from having danced, having seen dance, to having an interest to see that. Once that goes away, then just the mere fact, and this would be what kind of when I watch singing shows, talent shows, it's very hard to tell people that people aren't fantastic, but have you heard this? And when you go to a fine arts school and you see these people in the flesh and how they progress, and when you hear live performance, and it's a very hard thing to develop taste. And again, it goes back to economics, right? The arts become the first cut. The first cut in education is arts, then physical education, and then eventually it'll be pay to play for everything. And now they just want to get they're dismantling whether that's important. And so but again, this all starts from a 30-year span of decisions that are made above our pay grade. And at very least, after all of this, we bombed in New Haven, my dad seeing Rocky, my dad loving My Big Fat Greek Wedding, one of the movies when we were older, and I don't know how we wound. Oh, I think we went to a Yankee game that got rained out. Yeah, I think in '96. I remember that memory. That was a bummer. Was to go to the old stadium. My bartending buddy Rico, and my dad and I got some tickets to a Yankee game. It got rained out, so we had to come back to the city, and so we saw a movie, and that was Sling Blade. We saw, which again, I don't know how much market research that was, but that was an actor somehow, some way. He made a short version of it. Billy Bob Thornton. He wrote it and starred in it, and he used that as a vehicle to propel him, and that is exactly the model that we follow with Rocky, with Sylvester Stallone, and there's a through line to seeing Sling Blade, and we both love Sling Blade. And it's these indie movies, that show a will, and then a couple years after seeing Sling Blade, my dad and we produced my play, and there's a sports theme and an underdog story, and I think that's what the arts do, is because how do I stay focused? I was blessed and with some auditions this week, and still in it to win it, and I haven't given up, and some of that comes from Rocky taking punches, and it comes at a cost. I don't know what life would look like if I had switched out sooner. I don't know what the future of this business looks, so it's personal to me, and obviously I think that's another reason I don't weigh in, or I weigh in passionately about this stuff, is because I'm not objective. I don't want AI to make movies. Some people don't have skin in the game. They don't care. If you're not a teacher, maybe you don't care that AI or YouTube University. If you're not a tenured professor, maybe you don't care that the universities are going to crumble. All of these things are personal, projected out onto public and systemic problems. And I don't know how to address my own inadequacies or my own feelings of the world getting by without me. I have to work that out, and I guess this is what I'm doing here, and I don't know that that's appropriate either. And I'm using a modern vessel, so I've adapted. Everybody says adapt or die, pivot or perish. I get it. I'm trying. We're all trying, but I mean, you got to move you're turning around an aircraft carrier sometimes when you've been doing something, one way for so long. And the promise of technology and these companies, they can pivot faster than systems can, and some people can, And so I would just say to me to not edit before the presentation, to be brave enough to put things out there that have backlashable ideas, and to maybe not read the reviews till the play is published or the movie's out, and once in a while watch something with a bad Rotten Tomatoes to see if you feel that you agree, because there's taste does come into things you'll like. I won't even click on certain movies, and then there's movies that I never thought I would like. I've all of a sudden, maybe it's with age, all of a sudden I like some of these romance Hallmark movies around the holidays, and then they sort of sprinkle them through the year, and what you're in for, and they're confections. I'll watch all of a sudden, sometimes it looks like it's a sports movie about a pitcher who broke his arm and got lupus, and you find out it's a faith-based movie, and I'll watch that, and it's got a beginning, middle, and end, and it's got a strong message, and I didn't think I'd ever be into that. And for certain, I never thought Game of Thrones would be something I'd be into because of the sorcery thing, and the dragon thing, and the fact that I dated in high school, and beating a dead horse, or beating a mystic horse, whatever. The point is that your own taste can change. So what do you think the rest of the culture is doing? And so you gotta. I guess you got to be more like Popeye and just say, I am what I am. And that's what I'll leave you with on the death session. But before I go, moving along on the playlist, we have a newer artist. I think the track I'm referencing is from 2022, so it's not that new. And by pop culture standards or pop music standards, it's ancient, but she's still making great music. And I'd like to say I just sort of stumbled upon it on a playlist, or I went random on a streamer, or it may have been just. I think that's more likely. It was a song on a like an R&B playlist that was in the. Hey, you also might like this, or it could have been a Shazam, because I'll hear things. Certainly nowadays, what an amazing invention that is, because the reason people don't know what's on the charts today is because they have to be a kind of in the loop of acquiring new music, But with Shazam, if it's a series on Netflix or something, and it's a youthful story, you press Shazam, you get you start to see what the kids are digging. And I like R&B, and so this is an R&B artist, Cleo Sol, S-O-L, I think, referring to the sun in Spanish, maybe. Cleo Sol is, and then the double entendre of it being soul. But it's an R&B artist from England, I just found out, and the name of the song is Sunshine. And it's kind of got a melancholy rain going down a pane of glass kind of opening, and it's got that sweet, happy, sad thing. Sunshine, you make me feel alive, a little more, a little more, a little more. And it's got this sort of, the chorus is a little uplift, and then it kind of settles back down in the verses where, that's kind of how I relate to the sun, and how I relate to how I came to be in California. As much as I wanted to stay in New York, I knew that, the sun is an important part of my mental health, and getting outside and weather being amenable to keeping your mood up. And then I think that's a little bit of the hidden vibe in that song, and why the R&B and the sort of sexy groove of it, and that it would have been one of my makeout mix CDs back in the day for sure. Now it's on a playlist, but I think with the sad, happy, and the little melancholy, and then Sunshine with the little lift, you make me feel alive. I think that's the inherent thing in all great art, is that we're here for as long as we are, and we're going to try to touch the sun. And Springsteen says it in Born to Run. Someday, Wendy, I don't know when, but we're going to get to that place where we really wanted to go, and we'll walk in the sun. But till then, that's what all that imagery means. And to the degree that everything is redundant and everything's been done before, and that there are no original plots, I think we're kind of, that's what all shows are about, And they say things are pretty simple, right? You're either a giver, or you're either a taker. Some might say then there's destroyers, and that's a great way to look at your characters and your plays and your stories. Someone's a giver or a taker, or some people argue that every scene is a negotiation, and there's all these sort of axioms that refer to good writing and good storytelling and songwriting. And don't bore us, get to the chorus. And she gets to that chorus, and she works that sunshine, you make me feel alive. And so I guess that's where I'll be with Death Session 78, is I feel alive, and thank God for that. So go out there and get some sun if you can, and think about not being as critical and being more of a creator, or just be an avid audience member too, and know the stuff ain't easy, even if it looks effortless. All right, peace.